I was asleep, and the shaking, at first, it's such a loud, loud roar. That's the first thing that I remember hearing. And then the shaking, and I was thrown off my bed, and I had low windows in my bedroom. And I remember looking out the window and seeing the full moon, which was close to the horizon because it was a full moon at dawn. It would be that. And it was like moving around, like shaking. The moon was shaking, and I had no idea what it was. And my bed kind of marched over on top of me. So it was, quite bad. I lived on Bledsoe Street, just a few blocks down from Oliveira Hospital. Um, my father worked at the hospital. Um, so anyway, so soon after that, my mother came and checking to see if I was okay. She had already been up. Um, my brother in his bedroom had a bunch of books. He had bookshelves above his bed, and he was covered with books. Um, and it was so just getting up and walking around and seeing just, the piano in the living room was on the opposite side. And my mother did a lot of canning of peaches and things like that. And they had, just all spilled out all over the floor in the kitchen. So there was glass and food and everything everywhere. And it was pretty scary. So that was actually that morning of what I remember, what it was like.
You said that uh, your brother's room was covered with books. Is that what?
Yes, yeah, and he had a down comforter, and so he had put it over his head, and so that had protected him from being hurt too badly by the books. But it was a huge bookshelf. It was loaded. Yeah.
You know, I can't tell you how many people have said something about their piano. I must have been the only person in Sylmar who didn't have a piano. Do you have an upright or a baby grand?
It was a spinet. It was an upright spinet. Yeah, yeah. It wasn't huge, but it was amazing to see it walk across the living room. Things had just had, so it must have been like a lot of lateral movement to have that happen. Yeah.
I remember so many, um, all the end tables were turned upside down. And of course, the kitchen was a real mess because
Mhm.
like everything came out. Same thing with you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that your father worked at Oliveira Hospital.
Yes, he worked in the radiology department there, which was on in the basement. When they built the new hospital, it was like the ground floor, which was partially in the basement. And the hospital had just opened up a few months before the earthquake, and he was very proud of all of the state of the art equipment and things like that. Um, I was a candy striper at the hospital. I used to walk there after school. Um, and so it was like maybe 4 months that I was actually working at all of you. And then, so the morning of after the earthquake, I remember my dad, the first thing he did, well, the garage had kind of tipped over on the cars, but he got one of them out and he drove up to the hospital to see what was going on, and it was devastating for him. Um, and I don't know if you remember seeing pictures of it, but it was pretty rigid. But just like the ends of the wings had just fallen off the building, and the the basement or where radiology was pretty much, it was half the height that it was before. So things had really come down on it. Um, and I think we were just all very feeling like, wow, we could have been in there when that happened because we were there so much. Um, and Yeah, that was still that morning. Um, and then later in that, oh, so moving on through the day a little bit, um, my aunt came over and helped my mom scoop up all the food and stuff in the kitchen. We had a little travel trailer outside, so that became like our kitchen. Um, and then pitching, my father pitched a tent for my brother and I. My brother was like a year older than me, so well, he was probably 15 at that time. Um, and and then because we didn't have water, we didn't have sewer, we didn't have actually we had a septic tank, but because we didn't have any water, we couldn't use the toilet. So my dad dug a hole um, back by a shed so we had a toilet. So it was kind of like getting, okay, what do we need? What are the first things we need to be able to just, survive? And so we didn't have water. We drove somewhere to get some water. Uh, but it was, that first night sleeping in the tent with all of the aftershocks was just terrifying. Um, and it just, for years and years, I would lay in bed. Like I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be laying in bed and I would just think about the bed shaking. And I want to say, see, I moved from Selmar up to San Francisco after I graduated high school in 73. So, and I was thinking about it all the time there. And it was like, I never wanted to be in an earthquake again. And I don't live in cities that have earthquakes anymore because, I'm up in Northern California in the foothills and we could have an earthquake here, but I feel like I've got more, like just resources here to be able to make it. I've got a well, I've got food, I've got I've got a generator, I've got all those things. So it really stuck with me that I need to be prepared for disasters like that. So, yeah.
When your father went back up to the hospital,
Hmm.
um, did he lose any friends? Did he find, what was his reaction to all that?
I don't think there were that many deaths at the hospital, and I think it was the Veterans Hospital that had more. Um, he didn't lose any friends, and because it was 6 a.m., really no one was working in his department at that time. Um, but it. I think the uncertainty of his job, it just caused a lot of problems. When years later, when I was reading about disasters and traumatic incidences and how it affects the whole family, um, I thought back on that time and how things really fell apart in my family after the earthquake. Um, my father started drinking more. Um, I was 13 going, a really awkward, critical time. My mother was working and there was just kind of like chaos and no one really connected in the household. So it was a tough time for our family that lasted afterwards, not just because of the earthquake, but because of the trauma, post-traumatic stress. I've had it for a long time. That experience really stayed with me.
A lot of people we're talking to, we're finding out there are two things we're seeing. That is one of them. The other is the sense of community that people felt immediately after, because they had to come together because, as you mentioned, there were no working toilets there. You know,
Mhm.
the city brought in porta potties and brought in a general hotel, brought in phone banks. Did you feel that as well?
You know, I remember going to, like, Olive Vista had a, you know, school was canceled, but there was like a Red Cross truck that gave out sandwiches. And and there was like a water truck that would go somewhere near Silmar Park, and we would go there and fill up our jugs. And so I think we saw people that we normally didn't see. I, I could certainly see how neighbors would come together because they had something, you know, in common and trying to help each other out. I wasn't that acutely aware of it. I think maybe because of my age.
You know, one of you mentioned Silmar Park because I remember the phone banks they set up were right there at the corner of
Oh, yeah.
um,
I think there
Fort.
was a Pacific Bell.
No, it's General Tell.
Oh, General Tell was the
Yeah.
building on the corner there.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, I remember they set it up at because I worked at Country Cousins, which was right down the street.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And the next block, 2 blocks up, right in the corner of Olive Vista, and so that's what Polk
The
and
Polk, right.
was it Borden? No, Borden was the north. Yeah,
Borden was the cross street.
right at the
Yeah.
park, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember it being set up there, the phone banks being set up there, and I remember water trucks right up the street from where I lived on Nermy, down half block below Bradley. So there was a water truck set up there where the bridge was, and they set that up there. Do you remember a police presence at all?
No. No, I remember seeing pictures of in the newspaper. My father collected the newspaper things of what happened in San Fernando with looters. I don't remember any police in my area.
Because, you know, they did have cops patrolling, and I don't remember whether it was LAPD or LA County Sheriff. But I remember they had, because we weren't allowed to leave well, and people weren't allowed in. You know, they weren't
Oh, okay.
looky-loos in. Yeah. I
Right.
want to talk about your post-traumatic stress. Did you get diagnosed with that later on? Did you ever get any help with it or anything, or any counseling or anything like that?
Yeah, I did, but it wasn't, I hadn't identified that with, you know, the earthquake with it. I mean, a general level of anxiety and any kind of rumble, any kind of shake. It doesn't take much shaking. And I'm learning in this house. Let's see, I've lived in this house since '83, and one of the mirrors in here, whenever there's the slightest little jumble, the mirror rattles on the wall, and I go back to it. I go right back to it, and I think the stress. What was when I did get help and therapy later, it was more about because of my dad's drinking than it was. That's what I was focused on just how, you know, kind of family life just kind of fell apart. And nothing was safe. You know, I never felt safe. Um,
And you relate that back to the traumatic experience of the earthquake your dad had, started drinking after the quake.
Mhm.
Now, how did your brother take all this?
I mean, he just kind of stayed to himself. You know, we grew up, we were close in age, and we were like best friends. And about that time, I mean, I kind of lost a friend. He did not have, I mean, it was also our ages, and that's what I thought a lot of the problem was because I was becoming a teenager, and I was the problem. But I think he also reacted to just, you know, the change in the family, not necessarily thinking it was the earthquake. He still lives in Southern Cal. He lives in Pasadena now. So I guess an earthquake didn't bother him that much like it did for me. Like I never wanted to live there again, or any other city that is prone to earthquakes. But he just kind of became separated from the family. I mean, just did not, you know, we stopped having family dinners together. We kind of just each did our own little thing in the house and really didn't relate. It's really sad, you know. I think it affected me in the sense when I got older, I wanted to make sure if I had a family, which I do, to just, you know, be really, you know, keep everyone together, you know, because families need each other, especially after times like that.
Did your parents get divorced, or did they stay together?
No, they stayed together. And my father eventually quit drinking. But, you know, he killed himself by suicide. So that was kind of, could that be related to that? I don't know. I don't know. It was just such a stressful time. It started a cascade of, I think, a lot of anxiety and stress in the family. So, yeah.
Did that happen long after the earthquake? Or?
Yeah. It was in '97. So that's like over 20 years. That's 22 years ago. 23. Yeah. Hard to believe. Yeah.
It's hard to believe in February it's 50 years since this happened.
I know, 50. Yeah. I don't know why you guys live down there.
Work.
Right, work, right.
Hey, Ed, you want to jump in? You have any questions you want to ask?
Yeah. I mean, actually, there's a lot of stuff I would normally ask, which you covered automatically. But I do have a question about camping in the backyard and how much of that was pre-planned, and how much? I mean, was it like, oh, so and so needs to use a restroom, so I better dig a latrine, or was it okay? We've gone camping, and here's a plan, and here's a layout. I just would love to hear like kind of a walkthrough of that day, if you. I mean, obviously not every minute, but like whatever you kind of recall.
Right. Well, I mean, our family was used to camping, so that probably made it easier, but none of us wanted to be inside the house. That was where we felt the most unsafe. So, it was like we were going to sleep outside no matter what it was. And I think that was you probably have heard that from other people too. I think it wasn't like we had an emergency plan. I think it was just like, okay, what are we going to do? And my dad probably had to go to the bathroom, so he dug the hole. Or you know, maybe my mom said something to him about it. I don't remember that. But the tent was like, okay, we've got the tent, we've got the cots, we've got the sleeping bag. Let's do that. And you know, so it actually worked pretty well. Yeah, I think my parents were resourceful. You know, they grew up on farms as kids and had lived through the Depression, so they knew how to make do with whatever they had. So the most important thing that I wanted to share was that how it had lifelong effects for me. And I've talked to my daughters about it, and they, you know, were like, oh, that sounds so exciting. I want to be in an earthquake. And well, they've been in smaller ones, but I guess that's the main thing, is I just want to say it just had huge effects on my family beyond just losing, you know, cars and the chimney and canned foods and all of that.